Okay, so this afternoon we're going to be talking through the vehicle of React about front-end framework concepts. So we will be looking at React code, refactoring some React code, but we're mostly going to be focused on the concepts at play. So it's going to be particularly relevant to React, but the concepts are transferable to any front-end framework. So even though React is sort of our vehicle for today and potentially for future lessons, this is probably going to be the start of a series that Liz and I will do. Please know that you do not have to be tied to React if you're participating in this. You can translate this knowledge to Vue or to Angular or to really any of the front-end frameworks. So our objectives for today are to explain the use case for front-end frameworks, to explain the benefits of componentization, which is breaking your application up into components, and then we'll practice refactoring some pre-existing code that isn't using components to use components. So this is really going to be a pretty high-level view of frameworks and of how to do some of the basic and most core implementations in React. Any questions before we get started? Okay, cool. And also, if you have already been diving into React and this just isn't feeling helpful right now, like this will be a series, so we'll be getting into more and more complex stuff. Feel free to get up and leave at any time if you're not getting good value out of being here. So, without further ado, I believe everyone here already has this repo, correct? Forked, cloned, on their local machine. Cool. So I want to mention for anyone who's watching the video that there's a link to the repo. You know what? I actually don't have the link in the README. I'll get that in the README for any future people. And then once you have the repo, again, run npm install if you haven't yet. I've already done that, so I'm not going to, actually, I'm just going to go ahead and do it right now. So we're all on the same page. And once this finishes up, there's a nice built-in script that lets us run the application, sort of like Light Server, but for front-end frameworks. So we'll be able to open it up in our browser, and it'll auto-refresh every time we make changes. So as this finishes up, let's take a quick look at the file and folder structure. So right now we're not even going to be delving into the code, but while this is running, we'll just do a quick explanation. There's a lot of files in here. Most of them you do not need to really worry about right now. Obviously you can make some notes in your README here, and there's some resources that are linked, but this source folder is kind of the heart of the application. And the main file that we're going to be focused on, at least to start, is the app.js file. So this has a bunch of content in here. This is what we're going to be refactoring ultimately at the end of the lesson to be using a component structure, a component hierarchy. So app.js and then this components folder are where we're going to be spending our time for this breakout. And let's see, still installing a little bit. Once this finishes up, and in fact if you have it already finished, you can run npm start in your terminal. And what that does is reads from the package JSON. Let me zoom this in a little bit. You can see there's a bunch of scripts in here. Build is more for when you're ready to deploy. Test and eject, we're really just not going to worry about beyond the scope of what we want right now. But this start script basically packages up this source folder and runs it so you can actually work with it. So let's see if mine has finished. Yes, it looks like it has. So I'm going to run npm start here. And we should be in business. You should see a tab just open right up on localhost 3000. And once it fully builds, we have an app. So don't worry too much about the app right now. What we really want to do is focus on this first objective. So we want to be able to explain the use case for front-end frameworks. Now to that end, I'm going to throw 3 minutes or so up on the board. And I want you to do a little homework, do a little research. You can check out the actual React documentation or just do some Googling on why we use front-end frameworks, that kind of thing. And then we'll have a little bit of group discussion about it. So I'm going to throw up a 3-minute timer and go ahead and do some research. And as you're doing some research, maybe jot down some notes. Why? This is not what I wanted. Nope. Jot down some notes with the goal of being able to construct a sentence explaining the use case for front-end frameworks in your own word. So 3 minutes starting about now. Also, when we use the term front-end framework in this context, we're referring to front-end JavaScript frameworks. So if you're running into results that are talking about Bootstrap or Materialize or Bulma or anything like that, those are CSS frameworks, not to be confused with front-end JavaScript frameworks. About a minute left. Keep in mind you want to be able to explain why we use front-end frameworks, even if you just have one point to that effect. Last 10 seconds or so. I'm going to catch this before it beeps. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is I'm going to throw another minute and a half up. Now see if you can, in the notes section perhaps of the README or your notes app on your computer or whatever, see if you can write down one sentence that sort of encapsulates why we use front-end frameworks in the first place. Or as I said, even just one point to that effect. We'll just do 1 minute. And it's okay if you don't have a complete answer or you don't fully get it right now. That's part of why we're going to have a little bit of discussion about it after this. About 20 seconds or so left to wrap up some of your thoughts. Okay, about time on writing our sentence. So let's now do 2 minutes, do a turn and talk with someone next to you, or you can talk as a small group if you'd like, and kind of compare and contrast what you have written down and see if you can suss out together, again, why we use front-end frameworks, what the use case is, why are we adding this layer of potential complexity on top of what we know. 2 minutes starting now.
Applications faster. It's approach where
If you feel like you and your partner have kind of nailed things down, maybe sort of smash your sentences together or modify one of your sentences to sort of include your thoughts together. And then we'll, I'd like to hear from each group. And we'll sort of kind of build a list together of why we want to use front-end frameworks in the first place. All right, it seems like everybody kind of has an answer. Or discussion has slowed down a little bit, so we'll just stop a little bit early. And I'd like to hear, I'd just like to hear from every group actually, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy this into our notes here, and we'll jot down some reasons why. Let's start with Keith, Sean.
So we're saying on your they kind of as a library that gives you a lot of tools for coding to make it faster and efficient. Sean was mentioning that we don't fully understand sketch, but it's like it allows you to interact with the DOM without directly interacting with the ship.
Yeah. Here, let me get rid of the slides here. Allows you to interact with DOM, let's just say indirectly. Sort of like, let's say, moving away from direct DOM manipulation, which is absolutely true. And we can get a little more granular about why that's a benefit, but it definitely is a benefit. Cool. Let's whip it around this way. Orlando and Alex. Cool. So I'm going to just add in makes slick user interfaces. And by slick, I mean they're very responsive. It gets into another point, which I want to see if anyone else brings up. But it allows us to make user interfaces that feel very responsive, fast, etc. Nice. Very nice. Adrian, David.
One of the things that we said is for the user interface, it's faster, and also for the developer, it's faster to update. If you want to change one component, a button or something, you can just update the component and not have to line up where we have a similar style button.
Nice. I'm gonna move that sort of under allowing you to interact with the DOM indirectly. Update only components that quote unquote need it. So we focus a lot on changing data when we work with front-end frameworks, and certainly with React. Rather than worrying about what elements on the page we want to change, we worry about changing our data, and React or Vue or Angular or Ember takes care of the DOM manipulation for us. So again, it goes into some of the benefits of componentization as well, which we'll talk about some more. But yes, very, very good point. Update only components that need it. And sort of, responsive, faster user interfaces. Nice. Coleman. Chris.
So front-end frameworks are declarative versus imperative, is that correct?
I believe so. I think React is at least.
But our just of it was front-end frameworks help build applications faster and more efficiently with a component-based approach where these components can be reused.
Nice. Component-based approach. If I could type. Component-based approach. Reusable components. And I'm just going to add as my own note here, keeps our code dry, right? Don't repeat yourself as much as possible as a general principle of programming. Front-end frameworks are really, really useful for this. And this notion of reusable components or components that you can use in many places in your application, or if you're an organization, many applications potentially, allows you to really save a lot of time and energy, not repeating yourself. And again, all you worry about is changing some of the data, some of the properties of those components, and they can produce some different results for you. It's a really nice list. Anybody have any final thoughts to add to this? Okay, cool. Sounds great. This is really nice. Reuse. Jeez, I can't type. Reusable. Okay, great. So now let's talk about componentization. And again, I want to do just 2 minutes this time to do some research, And what I'd like you to do is take a look directly at this link right here, the components and props page of the React docs. It looks something like this. And 2 minutes, kind of approach it the same way. Do a little reading on that page with the idea of being able to explain why we are moving to this componentization model, why we are breaking a page up into components. Do 2 minutes to research on your own. You don't have to write out a complete sentence for this one, but take some notes, or at least take some mental notes as you read through, so that we can discuss together. We got about 30 seconds left for research. All right, last few seconds to wrap up some of your reading. And then, again, let's do a minute 30. I think that's probably enough. Again, do a turn and talk with your neighbor. You can talk with the same person that you were working through things the first time. And then we'll have a little bit of group discussion. So, actually, let's do 2 minutes. 2 minutes, we can always stop early if we want to.
It allows for use. Component-based UI approach accelerates development. Interactive agile development. That makes sense. Like, have multiple different components together. Ensures the user experience consistency across the portfolio. Component library is a point for governance of business. Component-based versioning, integration library. Easily integrates into the thought process. Optimizes the requirements of the process. It's a pretty good article in general.
Sweet. Awesome. It might be worth slacking out.
I'll suck it out.
Yeah, suck it out.
Slack it to me, baby.
All right, it sounds like discussion has slowed down a little bit, so let's stop our timer a little bit early. And I'd like to do the same thing. Let's just whip it around and get some thoughts from each of our groups. We'll start on the my left this time. So Coleman and Chris, what are your thoughts on? Give me at least just one benefit of componentization, and we'll take some notes here together.
Component-based approach, based UI approach accelerates development.
So accelerates development. Can you expand on that a little bit? Why might it accelerate development?
Because you can break your UI into several components. You can have multiple
Yes, yes, this is a huge, huge benefit. Break UI into several components. Multiple people / teams can be working on different components. So I know you guys, I think you haven't done a whole lot of group work yet, but you're familiar at least with the concept of merge conflicts. And like, I think some of you ran into that when we did pairing days, right? So merge conflicts are a pain in the ass. There's no way around it. They're not that bad, but ideally we want to avoid them. Having this component-based approach can be very helpful for that, because if Liz and I are collaborating on an application and we both essentially need to be working on the same like set of HTML and the JavaScript that goes with it, if we only really have like 2 or 3 files in our whole application, then if I want to work on the HTML, it kind of like Liz kind of can't work on it, or she could, but we're probably going to create merge conflicts. Similarly, if Liz needs to change some logic, and I've been working on logic for my part of the application, if we just have everything in one file, we're going to create merge conflicts. We're going to run into issues. Our workflow is not going to be ideal. But if we split things into components, then Liz can be working on the header component of our page, and I can be working on a card component. And we have this really nice separation of concerns. So all of the logic for her component exists inside of it, or is linked directly to it. All the logic for mine is just linked to mine. Similarly with our HTML, with our templates. So we don't have to worry about crossing wires. And so you can imagine if you extrapolate that on a whole team, you can have lots of different people working on lots of different parts of the same application without creating issues for each other. It's a really huge one. All right, moving around. David, Adrian.
It allows you to, I guess, put the user interface into functions.
Cool. Let's say break UI into functions. And then in the case of React functions / classes, not every framework handles this exactly the same way, but most of them have moved to a class-based model. And then like React has the concept of functional components as well. Cool. So like these like bite-sized pieces that can be updated on their own, similar to like the benefits of just breaking them up in the first place. Nice. Alex, Orlando? Yes. Or modular kind of speaks to this breaking things up into pieces. More modular, which this kind of segmented approach to development, echoing a lot of the benefits that we have above here. Nice. And Sean, Key.
So I know that like it takes in like those functions and things to take in props.
Yes.
So it seems like rather than having to rewrite the code, just change.
Yeah, very much so. So React specifically calls these things props. I think Vue does as well. But basically, like we have these modular components, and in order for them to do different things for us without having to rewrite too much code, we can just change those props, those properties, and also those potentially methods as well. So we can pass data, and we can also pass functions / methods. Since many of these are class-based now, when we write functions, they're attached to objects, which makes them methods. Okay, great. This is a very, very nice list. Anything you would like to add, Liz? Do you think that there's anything we're missing here?
Can we talk about reusability?
I think we did more just with the use case for front-end frameworks in general, but yeah, absolutely.
Well, what's really nice too is that say you have like a certain header, well, you can make another header component. You can just switch them out easily, and then you can change the code on one, and you can just switch it out.
Yeah, it plays in with this. We change some props. Maybe we change a color prop on a header. We get a different background color, but we can still reuse that same component. We just change one little piece of it. Similarly, like with the text that renders from the component. Awesome. This is a great list. So let's take another look back up at our objectives. So we've talked about the use case for front-end frameworks in general, talked about some of the benefits of componentization. So now let's actually put it into practice. So you can follow along. You do not have to follow the code. I would just mostly watch for right now. I'm going to show you how to split this code, which is right now in one block, into a component, and then you guys will have some time to work on doing that for another section of the site. So, yes.
What is a class?
A class, okay, so a class, without going too deep into it, is essentially an object. You can think of it almost interchangeably with object for right now. So a class in the context of, say, React is an object that has some like properties on it, like some just regular sort of key value pairs, and also has some methods or functions attached to it. So classes we'll get into in much more depth when we get into the OOP part of the curriculum. For right now, you can just think of it as an object. Yep. Good, great question. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, great. Let's take a look at the code then. So as I mentioned, we're mostly going to be focused on this app.js file. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And so we were talking about classes a little bit. So this is essentially, think of this here, this component, which is called app right now, is basically just an object that has a render function on it, so a render method that returns some JSX. JSX is basically HTML inside of JavaScript. So there are a few differences, like we need to use the keyword class name instead of class, like we would with regular HTML, because we're in JavaScript land and the class keyword is reserved for instantiating actual classes. So that's why you see class name here, but that is just because we're writing JSX. So this is just setting the class of this image to app logo, as you would normally expect. So basically, this is the heart of our application. We just have a div that is containing everything. We have a header, which if we move over to the actual app is this section of the app right here. It's got this logo inside of it, this image, the source of which is being brought in locally with this import statement. H1, P, an image, another P. So this is what you see right here. It's fairly, pretty simple right now, nothing too complex going on. And it's basically being written as you've been writing apps up until this point, right? One HTML file that basically contains your whole application. So how can we break this into components? Or I should say, let's take like 10, 15 seconds to think about what parts of this page might make sense to split into components. I know you don't necessarily have a lot of practice thinking like this yet, but I'm curious to see what your thoughts are. Right now, this is essentially like one component, if you will, or one big app. What we want to do is potentially split parts of it into segments, into like modules, and then our app.js, rather than rendering everything itself, will just be coordinating where those components go, how those components go together. So again, take a good 15 seconds, let's think about it, and then I'll take a couple thoughts.
What more Ipsum generator are you using for this?
Hipster Ipsum.
Okay, let's say.
This was a real good one too. Organic Meditation Trust Fund. That's a strong start to a paragraph. All right, who has a thought as to how we can maybe split this into components? Yeah, Coleman.
Okay, we could start with the header.
Yeah, start with the header. That makes a lot of sense, right? It's already kind of wrapped in its own sort of container, so we could just extract that, and in fact, that's what I'm going to show you how to do. We'll extract the header into its own component file, link it in here. All right, what else could be a component? Chris?
The image section with the paragraph.
Yeah.
Paragraph title.
Yeah, so like the image and the paragraph, or this and the image, maybe even just the image. Maybe this whole section, maybe you just have the header and then like your main section basically. Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Coleman.
Could you also do the logo and the title potentially as a component itself in case you had a different logo?
Yeah, absolutely. Logo and title right here. That like as a component together that maybe go inside of a header component. Now we've got some nested components. Absolutely. So the long and the short of can this be a component is basically yes to everything. It's a fine line and a balancing act between making everything a component and driving yourself mad, making like every element a component. At that point, you might as well just be writing all HTML again, and like having logical breakups of your code. So what we're gonna work on today is extracting this header, including what's in here. But you absolutely could put the logo and the text in another component. That would make sense to me. And then we're gonna treat this first set of text right here and the image that below it as a component. And then we're going to treat this paragraph at the very bottom as a component. But that doesn't mean that if you wanted to group all three of these together as a component or this and this as a component, that's not wrong. I just chose some fairly reasonable but also ultimately arbitrary sections to break up. So if this were like a card on the page, you know, like a material design style card that had a header and the image and a paragraph about it, then that probably should be one component on its own. But it depends on how you want to build and structure your app. So you have a lot of freedom here, which is part of why it's good to get reps in on splitting things up. Okay, any questions on that process or kind of looking at a page and thinking what could be a component, what could not be? Okay, cool, let's do it. So if we see we have this components folder inside of source, and what we're going to do is we're going to extract that header into this header.js file. So this header, main image, and paragraph, they all look pretty much the same right now. They're essentially functions. Someone mentioned functional components when we were talking about them. It is a function that receives props. By the way, this is the same as writing out function, header, parentheses, props, you know, and writing, you know, return something in here. Syntax, difference in syntax, and this is a more of the React way of declaring things, but no practical difference, really, that you need to worry about right now, at least. This is a function expression. Using that function keyword is a function declaration. Cool, so all these do is it's a function that returns some JSX, that returns some HTML, basically, and exports it so that it can be imported elsewhere in the app. So the first step that I'm going to take here is I'm literally just going to cut this code out. So from header to header, I'm just going to do Command X, pull it right out of the application, and move it over to header. So right now, header is returning an empty string. What we want it to do is return this whole block of HTML. And so when we need to return things that are on more than one line, open up a set of parentheses, just hit return, and then paste your JSX, paste your HTML right in there. So this is now a component that should work. If we go back to the app, you see our header is gone, right? Because we just pulled it straight out of the application. Now, this component looks good. It's being exported as a header. And so what we need to do to make it usable within the app is we need an import statement. So I'm going to make a little bit of room. And the way this works is we import then the name of the component that we want to have it exist as here, which I usually just shadow what I've actually named it. I recommend doing that. So import header from, and then you need to put a path to the file. So /components, because components is a folder on the same level as app.js. So /components/header as a capital. It's important that you name your components capital. And then we don't need the JS. It'll still work if you include it, but we don't actually need it. Basically, our JavaScript is smart enough to know that we mean a JS file when we leave that off. So style choice, that's up to you if you want to have it in there or leave it off. You'll mostly see apps written leaving it off. Okay, cool. Now we have access to the header. Does anyone know how we can get it onto the page? What the syntax is. So we have access to it basically as like a variable. Okay, it's fine. So just like we were going to write a div or something like that, we now open it up like it's a new HTML element and just, excuse me, write header in there. And then close it out. Convention is usually to leave a little bit of a space. And let's see what happens. I think it might break. Yes, failed to compile. Let's take a look at the error. So logo is not defined. Line 6 of our header.js component. React has its own error handling, so they give you usually a pretty good amount of information here. So the issue is that the image source is being pumped in as essentially like as a variable logo. And when this HTML, when this JSX was in the root app.js file, we had this import logo from /logo. You won't have to do this for your refactor of the other things, but I'm just going to go ahead and bring that in here so that this component has access to it. And it's probably going to be /logo because we need to go up out of components, and then here's the logo file. It's an SVG image. So I think this should do the trick. Boom, we're back in business. We've got our header again. It looks exactly as it did before, but now it's being stored in a component. I know that was potentially a lot that I just threw at you. I'll make a little space right here so it's really obvious. We've got the header that we're importing, and then we're just rendering it. So it's basically just pumping in all that HTML, all that JSX that we extracted, and putting it right in as a template. Any questions on what I just did before I let you loose to take a stab at doing it yourself? Okay, cool. So your task now, and we'll just throw like 5 minutes on the board for this, is to take this middle section, so everything but the final paragraph, this P and this image. So if we look at the app, this right here, look at this beautiful image and the image itself, and refactor it into a component. So you can use this main image component. It's empty right now. What you need to do is extract it into the return statement. And if you run into problems, feel free to ask someone who's sitting near you. You can work together, that's totally fine. Or you can raise a hand and Liz and I will come around and help you out. But your goal is to extract this paragraph and this image into the main image component. Cool. Let's do a solid 5 minutes on this one. And just to let you know, you are probably going to run into an error when you do this. So it won't be the same error as I created, but you will run into an error most likely. And you're all developers, and I believe in you, and you can debug that error. So let's go. 5 minutes starting now.
Oh yeah, I did do. I see.
If you hit an error, make sure to take a look at the message and see if you can figure out what it's asking for. Potentially do some Googling if you're not exactly sure. Got a little more than a minute left.
What kind of treasure?
Not the C. Got about 20 seconds left. All right, final seconds here. And I'll tell you what, if you have some, this is kind of a hard one to just do to post. Tell you what, who feels like they got an answer? They've kind of pulled that out, it's working. Cool. And those who don't have it fully, do you feel like you made some progress towards it? A little bit? Okay, cool. Let's Gotcha. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. We're gonna have Keith actually. Will you start walking us through what we need to do here? So we have header done. We're focused now on this paragraph and this image, and Keith is gonna navigate while I drive here. Well, you're gonna do a little pair programming, and I'm gonna have Keith kind of walk me through it. So what's the first thing I should do, Keith?
So you're going to select that section of code you're trying to take out.
Cool. So select it all. Cut it out. I'm in app.js. Main image.js. Nice.
And then you want to change those quotes after return to parentheses.
Nice. Parentheses, so we can do a multi-line return.
And then you get hit return and then paste it in there.
Okay, cool. Nice. Very nice. So my syntax is yelling a little bit right now. I'm getting some red. Let's just take a look at the app and see what's going on. It's perfect. Everything's wonderful. No. Okay. Well. Yeah, you're right. I didn't save app.js. Okay, cool. All right. Everything looks okay so far. We've lost the middle part of the app, but that's what we expected, right? We just cut it out and we pasted it in main image. Nice. Okay, next step. Help me recreate the error that you ran into.
So yeah, so if you scroll over that, I think it'll probably say that, or the parentheses, I think it'll probably say it's a JSX expression needs a parent element, so you can wrap that in like a section, just wrap that section tag.
Cool. I'm gonna hold off on that and then walk me through importing it so we see in the browser the exact error. But yes, you're exactly right.
So if you go back to app.js,
Yes.
you want to type in imports
Cool.
after you get that,
Import
and then
main image from
have the same format.
cool /components/main image. That's the name of the file. That's the path to the file. And now render it, right? Cool. So just like we did with header, we can open up like essentially an HTML tag, pump in main image there, and now let's see what we get. Okay, cool. This is what I was hoping for. So if you got to this point, you did really good. So syntax error, adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So same thing that when Keith told me to hover over here, that VS Code was letting me know what's wrong. So Keith meant, what did you say, Keith? How do we fix this?
You need to wrap it in like a parent tag, so I did like a section tag.
Cool. So this is just the way JSX works in general. You need to return a complete block of code. So if you're trying to return a P and then an image, it doesn't know what to do. But if you wrap everything in a container element, so this could be a div, a section, an article.
Well, it can't be a section because semantically it has to have a header. It should be a section.
Ooh, nice, Orlando. Props, props. Okay, so I'm just going to do a div then. I'm going to do a div. Whoops. We'll tab these in and close out that div. And we see the syntax highlighting error went away. And if we go back to the app, boom, we're back in business. I'll zoom in a little bit. And now, yeah, we're back to right where we started. But now we have another part of our page in a component. So what I would like now is for someone who, actually, you know what, before we move on, any questions about that process? Got a chance to give it a shot on your own? Keith kind of walked me through his process. Yes, Trey.
So my question is, so in the actual app.js, this is technically under the parent elements of, or with class, that's a div with class name equal to app.
Yes.
And I was wondering if, or why we don't use that same syntax, or like why we don't have the class name app when we assign a parent element to an image.
Like inside here?
Yes.
So you could have class name app. Ultimately, what that's doing is it's just handling some default styling. So if we look at the app.css file, this CSS file applies for the whole application. And we see we have app, just text align center. So all that class name is doing is center aligning text. Let's see what happens if we switch over. I think the text was essentially already center aligned. Let's see. Yeah, because I think, well, in any case, this is just part of the boilerplate that you get when you generate a React application through their shell script, which is awesome. Like, I did not have to write all these files out and wire them together myself. React provides you, and so does Vue, and like all of them do now. You used to have to do all this manually, this scaffolding. Now you run one command in your terminal, create-react-app, the name of the app, and it generates almost all of this for you. Not the components folder, but everything else. So the long and the short of it is that you could have a class name on this containing div right here, but that is just doing styling in this case. So that's up to you, basically. Yeah, good question. Did I see another hand over here? Coleman, did you have a question?
So I watched a tutorial video and they were using all divs, and it was super confusing. You can use any HTML tag.
You can use any valid HTML tag in your JSX. Yeah, and like that's why it still is we've moved a little bit away from semantic HTML at this point, just because of the way a lot of these frameworks are built, including the CSS frameworks like Bootstrap and when you look at the docs, you're like divs on divs on divs. So it's important to know semantic HTML, but we have strayed a little bit. That being said, even though you may break some conventions of semantics, it is still helpful now to use some semantic tags in your JSX, so it's easier to understand what the hell is going on. But ultimately, any container element will do for wrapping like multi-line. Cool, any other questions? All right, what I'd like to do now actually, you know what? Before we move on, can I get a quick fist of 5 on how confident you feel in your ability to take existing code and make it and like componentize it a little bit, even if it's just 1 or 2 components? Quick fist of 5. Okay, cool. So what I'd like to do now, and we'll wrap up in the next 5 minutes or so, is let's together refactor this last paragraph, even though it's only 1 element. Let's refactor this into a component as well. We'll put it into paragraph.js. And the way I'd like to do it is we'll do it in steps, and we'll just go around the room and have each person tell me what the next step is, and if they're stuck, someone can help them out. How's that sound? Okay, let's start over on the left. Riley, what's the first thing I should do if I want to turn this paragraph into a component, get it into this paragraph.js file?
Get it into the paragraph.js?
Well, so I want to turn this ultimately into its own component. So we'll do something like we did with header and main image. We'll end up with something like paragraph at the end. So how do we start getting towards that point?
You would want to make that JS file and make it like paragraph.js, right?
Yes, exactly. And so I've already taken care of that piece. So this is where we'll put it. But yeah, you're exactly right. This would be the first step, because normally you wouldn't have them anyway. So you'd create a new file and do the basics, import React, and kind of get your initial setup going. All right, you know what? That counts. Trey, what's the next step? What should I do?
So you're going to cut your p-tag out of the app.js.
Yes. Whoops, what the heck was that? Yes, exactly. So I'm going to select this whole line. I'm going to cut it out. And by the way, if you are using Atom keyboard shortcuts in VS Code or using Atom, if you do Command L, it selects the whole line you're on. And if you keep hitting it, it selects consecutive lines. Jeez, that was a tongue twister. Okay, Coleman, I've got that paragraph in my clipboard. I cut it out. What's the next step?
So we need to make a so on paragraph.js.
Yes.
Inside that function, we need to make a multi-line return. So we're going to put parentheses and paste that cut p tag
Nice.
into there.
Cool.
Stop there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Stop there. And then actually, do we need the parentheses for this particular one? No, it's just one element. Yeah. So I almost always wrap them like this anyways, just in case I want to add more later. And to be fair, you probably won't have that many components that are just one JSX or HTML element. But since this is the case now, we can go ahead and just break this onto the same line as the return and kind of tighten up that function a little bit. Very nice. Okay, Chris, next step.
Next we want to go back to our app.js file.
Nice. Cool. Import paragraph, capital P, because it's a component. Yep. // components. Cool. I'm going to stop you there. Alex, what's our next step now?
Then you want to do the p tag under the image and stop coding.
So p tag like this, or
Paragraph.
yes, paragraph. And we'll just close it off like that. And you can see I'm leaving a little bit of space. That's just sort of a convention. You'll mostly see people write React code when they're rendering their own components. Leave a little bit of space there. It just makes it a little bit more readable. Okay, cool. I think that might do the trick. So I'm sorry for those of you who didn't get a chance to contribute to that. But let's see. Oh, wait, did I not save my files? There it is. There it is. All right, awesome. Very nice. Very nice. So again, we're right back where we started at the beginning, but now our application is much more robust actually, because now Liz can work on the header if we need to work on the header. I can work on the main image. Coleman can work on the paragraph. And in fact, we can keep nesting. Like Coleman, I think, had suggested that some of these parts of the header, like the image and the H1, could be in their own component as well. So we could follow the same kind of pattern, extract this into another component, import it here, and then render it inside this component. And then someone, Chris could be working on just that little component while I work on the header at large, and Liz works on the main image, and Coleman works on the paragraph. You can imagine how, as your app starts growing in complexity, this starts becoming more and more and more valuable. And one of the other benefits, to go back to our objectives, or sort of our discussion on the benefits here, where is it? Multiple people can work on different components, yes. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, in any case. Oh, yeah, so reusability. So if we wanted to reuse this header anywhere else in our application, now all we need to do is import header from path to the header, and we just toss in this one little tiny line of code, and we have a full legitimate header. So if we've got an app that has 12 different pages that all require a header, we can put that wherever it needs to be. Similarly, we can also just have one header and one footer, say, that wrap everything. and then have our entry point to the rest of our app be between them. So main image could maybe turn into a component that has a bunch of other components in it, some of which have other components ad infinitum, basically. Yes, Trey.
Just a syntax question.
Yes.
Does React treat semicolons the same way that JavaScript does? Like it's optional?
Yes. In fact, I stopped using semicolons when I started writing React, just because I don't know, I liked the look of it. It's very clean. But yeah, same conventions. Coleman.
So, when we're building these components in these functions, for example, paragraph JS, because it was only one element, we didn't need a parent container there, correct?
Exactly right.
More than one, we need a parent container?
Yes, so if you have, exactly. So Coleman's saying, because we only had one element in this whole return statement, and that's all that this component is configuring, we can just have it on one line. And we don't need a containing element. It would still work if we did wrap it in a containing element, but it's not necessary. Yeah. Almost never. Yeah. Almost never have a component with one line of JSX in it, because at that point you're like introducing an unneeded amount of complexity. We might as well just have this P class name right in app.js. Although this does make app.js read really clean and easy. But yeah, most often you're going to be at least a couple lines of JSX. Yep, great question. Awesome. Any final questions before we wrap up? And as I mentioned, like this is going to be the start of like, maybe a 3 or 4 part series. So we'll build up in complexity and start getting into some more advanced stuff. Any final thoughts, Liz?
No, React is cool,
It is. It's really, really cool. I love it.
but this is also a really great intro just to, like you were saying, to the other frameworks as well, like if you did Angular or Ember View.
Yeah, like these
are concepts that you're going to take for all of them.
Yeah, you're going to be building a component hierarchy for your applications no matter what framework you choose. Coleman.
So it seems like everybody has their framework is their baby. And
Yes.
like we're all choosing our own front end framework. So could you guys just give us like a quick pitch of why we should choose React? Because it seems like everyone has their own thing that they love.
Yeah. I tell you,
So like why? Why should I learn this?
Sure. So I tell you what, I'm going to stop the recording for right now, and then we can have a quick discussion about that. So thank you all so much for your time. Hope you learned something, and again, we'll dive deeper at a later date.